Hi, in this video I'll be showing you how to use Sharperlight to pull information from the cloud. To demonstrate this, I've created a dashboard that pulls web page information, RSS feeds, and also integrates information held in Google Spreadsheets. Let's have a look at the first part of the dashboard. You can see here I've graphed some currency rates, and I've also showed the spot rates for various main currencies. Let's have a look at the web page from where this information comes from. This is the web page where the monthly average rates are held. You can see here you can select your currencies, and there is a table on this web page. So Sharperlight has gone out to this URL address and pulled in these monthly rates so that we can create a report over it. A similar thing is done for the spot rates, and you can see it has its own unique address, and here we have the spot rates for each currency. So Sharperlight has pulled in this table of results and pulled them into a data set that we can then write reports over. If we move along to the gold prices, you can see that this web page has a lot more on it. We have charts, and then we have various tables looking at different gold prices. In this case, Sharperlight has targeted this table here. So in the demonstration I'll show you how to target which part of the web page you'd like to pull information from. Then we have a demonstration of a news feed, and over here we have two examples of Google Spreadsheets, one showing timesheet hours and the other percentage complete on projects. Let's have a look at the timesheet hours spreadsheet. So using my Google account, I've gone in and created a spreadsheet in the cloud, and I've recorded the number of hours worked each day. And this has been pulled back into that dashboard. If we have a look at the second one, you can see that this Google spreadsheet has a different format where we have the task, the description, and the start and end date and percentage complete, and some budget figures. So these spreadsheets have been used as a form of a data set. The interesting thing about these Google spreadsheets is if you were to share them with other participants, what you could do is have them update the figures. For example, I'm going to say that this particular project is now 62% complete. If we go back to our dashboard and refresh the page, you'll see now that task 1 will change to 62%, and the same for the timesheet hours. We could update the spreadsheet, refresh this page, and have the new figures come through. The same thing is happening for these spot rates as well. As the figures are changing, we could refresh this dashboard and have the new numbers come in. Now let's begin the exercise by looking at the currency monthly average rates. You can see here we have the address for the web page, and down here are the table of currencies averaged for each month of the year. Let's copy this URL address and go to Publisher, and in Publisher let's start a new report. We'll give the report a code and a description. I'll call this monthly rates. Next we'll start editing the query, so select Edit Query, and from the product list select System. Then from the table list go to the Internet folder and select Web Page Table. You can see here that we have Google Spreadsheets as well. For the first few examples we'll use Web Page Table. This will allow us to read in a web page and grab the table of contents, or if it's an RSS feed, grab the RSS feed. Initially it'll start off with an example URL address, and based on that URL address it'll try to infer what columns exist. So let's just have a look at the example, and you can see it's pulled it from that website, and if we were to go to that website you would see that these details marry up. But what we'd like to do is just change this URL address and paste in the one that we got from the currency exchange rate website. When you paste it in, you'll see that the columns on the left hand side will change depending on that URL address. So I'm just going to delete the previous query and output the new results. You can see we've got month and average rate, and if we were to preview that, it should look very similar to what's on the web page. You can see here that we've got 1990, and then we've got the exchange rate, and here we have the same exchange rate. At the moment it's just rounded off to 2 decimal places, so let's just change that format so we can see if it really is matching up. So just go back to the query, change the formatting, and say that we'd like to see all the decimal places. And if I preview those results again, you can see that it's now matching up with what's in the web page. So that's basically it. If we just paste in the URL address and then select the columns that we want. In this particular example, you can see there's the month, and at the bottom they've got an average for everything to date. What I could do is exclude the average from this report by doing this, putting the month into the filter and then saying not equal to average, and that would exclude that record from the report. Some of the options that are available are how many minutes would you like to keep this data set. Because we're going out to the internet, bringing it down and into Sharperlight might take some time, so we can actually say how long we'd like to keep this data set for. By default it's going to keep it for 10 minutes, but we could shorten that to say that we'd like to update it every half minute, which is 30 seconds. Because these are the average currency rates per month, what we could then do is use Materialized queries to actually turn this into a real table and update it, for example, every month, and then do subqueries from your ledger, for example, to go in and use this to look up the currency rate. Let's move on now to a more complicated scenario where there's more than one table on the web form. For the more complicated scenario, I'm using this web page. So we've got a chart, we have a number of tables on the web page, and we may want to target one particular table. Let's copy the URL address as we did before, and then come into Publisher and start a new report. Select System for the product, and then from the table list, Internet, Web page. Let's paste in the web page URL address, and you can see that because there's more than one table, it's quite confused about what to display. So if I was to list this, you can see we have a mismatch of all the combination of tables on that web page. But really what we want to do is just go for the perf mint, which is down the bottom here. So perf mint coins. So we just like that section. So what we do is go back to the query, and you can see here there's a filter option called Start Position. This will give Sharperlight a hint as to where to start on the web page. So let's paste in perf mint coins, and you can see now the list is refreshed. I'm just going to delete the output so we can reselect the new criteria. And you can see it's got T1 because it couldn't quite work out what to call that particular column because it was left blank. And then we've got selling and buying back. So if I was to preview that, you can see that it has matched up with what's in the spreadsheet. So we've got the prices of the various coins. And at the top we have the goat and the kangaroo, and you can see the prices are matching up. You can notice here that the line number helps us preserve the order in which the data appears in the table. Of course I could take out the line number, but on some occasions the order in which they appear, especially if they're the top 10, the order may be important, so you'd want to keep that line number. Let's have a look at the options again, and you can see here there's one called Clean Data. Now, by default, Sharperlight will try and clean up the table results to remove HTML tags and turn links into something that you can analyze. So if we turn that off, we can get back to the raw data that's in that table. So let's preview it again, and you can see that those labels for the different coins are in fact links. So if I was to do an expression, I could preserve that link information and do a report where you could click on the actual coin and go back to the original web page. Next, I'd like to explain a little bit about authentication. Occasionally some web pages require authentication. This is an advanced feature. In the majority of cases, if a web page required sign-on, it'd be very hard to get that data out. But if you were to put in the authentication token here, it would try and access that website. For the next part of this demonstration, I'd like to show how we can use Google Spreadsheets. You can see here we have timesheet hours and projects. Let's go to the timesheet hours spreadsheet. You can see here we have the spreadsheet organized, so we have our column names across the top, and then we have the values that make up those columns in a block. We can put formulas in this spreadsheet and of course have those calculated, but you need to be careful that you don't start putting values that break that data set. It needs to be a nice square or rectangular data set. You can't really put values out here because Sharperlight's looking for those columns and those values. Once you've created the spreadsheet, you can then start consuming it from Sharperlight. Now, if you haven't shared the spreadsheet, you'll need your account, your Google account, and your password and the unique identifier, the key for this spreadsheet to access it. I'm going to use Excel in this example to pull back these timesheet numbers. So I've started up Excel and I'm using the ShopLite add-in. And we'll start by clicking on Table. And just as before, we want to select the product as system, and from the tables we'd like to select Google Spreadsheet Tables. The first thing we need to do is put in our account details. And because this is not a public worksheet, I need to also put in my password. The next thing we need to do is put in the spreadsheet key, and I mentioned before that the key will appear in the URL address above, but if we select on the lookup, we can see a list of the keys for my particular account, and I could select from this list here. If it doesn't appear in this list, you can always go to the URL address and look for the big long sequence of letters and numbers and just copy that between the slashes and paste that into the spreadsheet key. Once you've done that and the key is valid, you should see the list of columns appear just as they do in the spreadsheet, and then from there we can then output the values and preview them. Now, just as with the web pages, there are some options to determine how long we should keep this particular data set. So by default it's set to 10 minutes, meaning that it'll try to keep that data without going out to the internet for 10 minutes. We can shorten that by just typing in a different number here. I'm going to select OK now and bring the data back into Excel. And I've just changed the formatting on some of the values to display the times correctly. What I'd like to do now is update the spreadsheet with some new values. So let's say that we worked 2 extra hours on this particular day. So that would be 8 hours and 1 hour overtime. And we'll go back to the spreadsheet now and refresh the spreadsheet. Currently the numbers say 7 and 0. You can see that they've just changed to 8 and 1. If those numbers didn't change, you would just need to look at the data refresh setting that was on the query in here under options, and you could force that to be a shorter interval. But with regard to Google Spreadsheets, Sharperlight's able to look at a modified flag to find out if it's been modified, so it's a little bit smarter about updating the results. In closing, I'd like to show how we can use Materialized queries to create a permanent copy of the data that's in the cloud. And a good example of this would be the average monthly currency conversion rates. That'd be something that we don't want to really go out every 10 minutes or so to the internet to pull down. We'd like to use Sharperlight Materialized queries to create a snapshot of that table, and we could update that once a day or once a week. So here's that web page again where we see the monthly rates, and just as we've done in the previous examples, we'll copy the URL address. There's a number of ways of getting to Materialized queries, and one way is via the query builder form. So I'm just going to load a previous or start a new report and go to the query builder, and I'll start building up the query that brings back the currency rates. So we'll go to Internet, Web Page, and I'll paste in that address, and you can see here we have the line, the month, and the average. And what I'd like to do is just take the month and the average and not create a materialized query over the line. And if I preview those results, you can see that most of the data looks good, except at the bottom there was that average. So I'd just like to exclude that from our materialized query. So I'll just put that month up into the filters and exclude the average. And if I looked at the data again, that average is gone from the actual query. So now we have our data set. We could also do some additional calculations here. What I'd like to do next is right click on the filter area and select Materialized Query. At the moment I don't have a Materialized Query database, so I'll just quickly create one. You will need permissions to do this, and I'll just call it my database and edit the tables. And here we'll say we've got a new table. It's just picked up the Materialized. It's picked up the query that we were working on before, and this is good to go. So let's just press OK, and now it's making a snapshot of that particular data set. And we can call this, give it a title, so monthly currency, monthly average currency rates. So that'll be the description for the table. And if I come back to, just close these windows and come back to my query builder, you'll see now that under products, there is our Materialized Query database, and in there is a new table called monthly average currency rate. And if we query this, you can see that it's just as it was on the internet, except that accessing and querying this database is going to be a lot quicker than going out to the internet, even though it was cached. So this is a table that's a perfect example where we could take particular transactions and then do a subquery to this table to look up the currency rate. If you're concerned about the accuracy of that rate, if I was to change the formatting to show more decimal places, you can see that in the preview it did preserve the full precision. Being a materialized query, all we need to do now is look at what rate we want to refresh that materialized query, which could be once a day or once a week. There are two other patterns which I didn't show in this demonstration, which were RSS feeds and JSON arrays. Essentially they're the same as what you saw with the currency rates, where you simply copy and paste the URL address. If it's a RSS feed, as you can see in this example, you'll have a title, description and link to the original article. If it's a JSON array, it'll simply pull the data in just as it would from any other web page. This has been a demonstration of how to use Sharperlight to access information in the cloud.